What happens when a nation dares to hold the world's oil supply hostage and then watches everything it built crumble in a matter of days? That is exactly the story unfolding right now in the waters of the Persian Gulf, and what has happened will leave you speechless. Before we get into it, if you are new here, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video with anyone who wants to understand what is really happening in the Middle East right now. Just weeks ago, Iran made a decision that shook global markets, terrified shipping companies, and forced world powers to take immediate action. The regime in Tehran ordered the Strait of Hormuz closed. For those who do not know why that matters, this narrow stretch of water, barely 33 kilometers wide at its tightest point, is the single most important oil choke point on the planet. Every single day, roughly 20 million barrels of oil pass through it. That is not a river of oil. That is the lifeblood of the global economy. And Iran decided to turn off the tap. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, known as the IRGC, issued a chilling warning. No American ship, no Israeli vessel, no European tanker would be allowed through. The commander of Iran's navy, Alireza Tangsiri, stood before cameras and said words that sent a shiver through every military analyst watching. He told the world that if anyone doubted Iran's resolve, they should come and test them. That is not the language of a nation looking for peace. That is the language of a nation that believes it has the upper hand. And to make the threat real, Iran did not stop at words. They launched an actual campaign of aggression against commercial shipping. 17 different tankers were attacked as they tried to pass through the strait. Explosive-laden drones struck without warning. Unmanned surface vessels, the kind military analysts call kamikaze boats, rammed into hulls above the waterline. The damage was devastating. 6 massive tankers were rendered completely unusable. One of the targeted ships was flying a Thai flag, a civilian vessel called the MV Mercer Street, and it was not involved in any military operation whatsoever. It was just carrying cargo through an international waterway. That is what made Iran's actions so alarming. They were not targeting warships. They were terrorizing civilian vessels. The chaos did not stop there. Even ships from countries that Iran considers allies were not spared. Russian LNG carriers found themselves in the crosshairs. That alone tells you how desperate and reckless the strategy had become. Iran was not discriminating. They were casting a wide net of destruction, and every ship in those waters was at risk. Now, to understand why Iran thought this gamble was worth taking, you have to understand what they believed the Strait of Hormuz gave them. See, Iran lost a significant portion of its conventional military power decades ago in clashes with the United States Navy. They learned the hard way that going head-to-head with American destroyers and aircraft carriers was a losing game, so they adapted. They shifted to a completely different strategy, one built on asymmetry. Instead of matching America ship for ship, they invested in weapons that were harder to detect, harder to destroy, and far more dangerous in confined waters. Anti-ship ballistic missiles, capable of traveling at speeds exceeding Mach 3, were hidden inside mountain caves along the coastline. These were not ordinary missiles. A single one of them could punch through the hull of the largest oil tanker ever built and send it to the bottom of the sea in minutes. Thousands of kamikaze drones, the Shahed 136 type, with ranges stretching across hundreds of kilometers, were stored in underground bunkers, ready to be launched at a moment's notice. Swarms of these drones, each costing only a few $100,000, could overwhelm even the most advanced defense systems through sheer numbers alone. And then there were the fast attack boats. Small, fast, and deadly, these vessels could dart out from hidden bases along Iran's coastline and swarm larger ships before anyone could respond. The shallow, island-filled waters around the Strait of Hormuz were practically designed for this kind of guerrilla naval warfare. Iran had turned geography itself into a weapon. But Iran was not fighting alone in the region. The Houthi rebels in Yemen, backed and supplied by Tehran, were launching their own attacks from the Red Sea using Iranian-designed missiles and drones. This created what military strategists called a dual choke point crisis. Ships trying to move between Asia and Europe now faced threats from 2 directions simultaneously: the Red Sea to the south, the Strait of Hormuz to the east. Global trade was being squeezed from both ends. The results were immediate and catastrophic for the shipping industry. Before the conflict escalated, between 70 and 80 large cargo ships would pass through the Strait of Hormuz every single day without incident. After Iran's attacks began, that number plummeted almost to 0 overnight. Over 1,000 commercial vessels anchored off the Gulf Coast, stuck and unable to move. Insurance premiums for ships transiting the region skyrocketed to levels never seen before. Some shipping companies simply stopped sailing through the area entirely, choosing to reroute around the entire southern tip of Africa instead. The economic damage was enormous, and it was growing by the hour. But here is where the story takes a turn that Iran did not see coming. And honestly, it is a turn that reveals something important about the limits of power in the modern world. Despite all of Iran's preparations, despite the missiles in the mountains and the drones in the tunnels, there were still some ships that managed to get through. And the reason why tells us a great deal about how global power actually works. Chinese linked vessels, for instance, made it through relatively safely. Why? Because Beijing's deep economic relationship with Tehran created an unspoken shield. These massive cargo ships broadcast their Chinese identity through their automatic identification systems, essentially telling everyone within range that attacking them would carry consequences China would not ignore. It was not a military shield, it was a diplomatic one. But it worked. Pakistan took a different approach. Facing urgent energy needs, the Pakistani Navy launched what they called Operation Muafi Salt. Armed escorts accompanied Pakistani civilian tankers through the danger zone, though they wisely avoided the narrowest and most dangerous parts of the strait itself, limiting their operations to the wider Arabian Sea. And then there was Turkey. The Turkish Minister of Transport made headlines when he revealed that 15 Turkish-owned ships were waiting to pass. Through sensitive diplomatic negotiations, one vessel called the Rosanna managed to get through safely. It became one of the rare success stories of a civilian ship navigating the war zone. What these exceptions proved was something crucial. The Strait of Hormuz was not completely closed. It was closed for those who lacked the power, the diplomacy, or the leverage to force their way through. Iran had turned a global commons into a toll booth, and passage was only available to those who could pay the price, whether that price was measured in alliances, influence, or cold hard geopolitical capital. But Iran went even further than just blocking ships. In an act that stunned even seasoned military observers, they began laying mines throughout the strait and surrounding waters. This was not a defensive measure. This was an attempt to make the entire region permanently dangerous. The mines were designed to be invisible to passing ships, sitting on the seabed, waiting for a hull to strike them. Military analysts estimated that if Iran had been allowed to complete their mining operation, the Strait of Hormuz could have been rendered impassable for years. Clearing naval mines is one of the most dangerous and time-consuming operations in warfare. Even a small number of mines can shut down an entire waterway for months. Iran was not just trying to win a battle. They were trying to poison the well for everyone, including themselves. And that is when the United States drew a line that could not be crossed. The American response was swift, overwhelming, and designed to send a message far beyond the Persian Gulf. The USS Gerald Ford and the USS Abraham Lincoln carrier strike groups, two of the most powerful naval formations ever assembled, were already positioned in the region. They were joined by additional warships, advanced aircraft, and a network of surveillance assets that turned the entire Gulf into what one Pentagon official described as the most closely monitored body of water on Earth. President Donald Trump addressed the nation directly, making it clear that the United States would not tolerate Iran's actions and would use whatever level of force necessary to restore freedom of navigation. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth reinforced that message, stating unequivocally that Iran's military capabilities had been massively degraded and that American forces would continue their operations until every threat to the Strait of Hormuz was eliminated. The military campaign that followed was methodical and devastating. American bombers flew sortie after sortie, targeting radar installations, drone launch facilities, underground command bunkers, and the very missile storage sites hidden in Iran's coastal mountains. Each strike was precision-guided, designed not just to destroy weapons, but to dismantle the entire chain of command that controlled them. Communication networks were disrupted. Supply lines were severed. The infrastructure that allowed Iran to coordinate its asymmetric warfare was being dismantled piece by piece. But the most dramatic phase of the operation was what happened to Iran's navy itself. Within days, 95% of Iran's operational fleet had been destroyed or rendered completely inoperable. Warships that had been a source of national pride were reduced to twisted wreckage. The few vessels that survived found themselves trapped. Iran's own territorial waters, once a safe harbor, were no longer secure under the relentless American bombardment. And that is when something extraordinary happened. Dozens of Iranian ships, corvettes, and small attack boats made a desperate decision. They fled. Not to fight another day, not to regroup. They fled in the most literal sense of the word. They left Iranian waters entirely and headed south into the open Indian Ocean, searching for refuge in ports thousands of kilometers away from home. It was a sight that nobody expected to see. The navy of a nation that had sworn to hold the world hostage was now running for its life. Among the ships that fled were three of Iran's most important naval assets, the Iris Dena, the Iris Lavon, and the Iris Bouchard. All three had been participating in joint exercises near Visakhapatnam, India, and were heading toward Sri Lanka when the American surveillance network tracked their movements. The U.S. Navy had been monitoring these ships from the moment they entered international waters. Every route, every destination, every possible port of call had already been calculated. The Iris Dena attempted to move quickly across the Indian Ocean toward the southern coast of Sri Lanka, covering roughly 1,500 to 2,000 nautical miles through open water. But speed was not enough. On March 4, 2026, The ship was struck by a torpedo fired from an American submarine off the coast of Sri Lanka. This was the first torpedo attack on a naval vessel since World War II, a grim reminder that the rules of engagement had changed entirely. The Iris Lavon tried a different approach. The ship headed toward India's southern coast, but suddenly changed course, claiming a technical malfunction. It barely made it to the port of Kochi before being intercepted. 183 crew members were taken into custody and housed at nearby Indian naval facilities. The ship was effectively seized. The Iris Bouchard followed a similar path, seeking shelter in the port of Colombo, Sri Lanka. But, like its sister ships, it was detained upon arrival. None of these vessels completed their escape. They were caught, tracked, and neutralized before they could find safe harbor. And yet, even this did not stop the exodus. Iranian ships based out of Bandar Abbas and Chabahar continued fleeing southward, scattering across the Indian Ocean and the waters near Pakistan and Oman. The U.S. military struck more than 60 ships during this period. Some of the surviving vessels attempted to disguise themselves as part of what has been called the Shadow Fleet, a network of tankers suspected of smuggling Iranian oil to China. Others simply tried to disappear into commercial traffic. But the American surveillance apparatus was too thorough. Dozens of ships were neutralized before reaching any destination. What the world witnessed in those chaotic days was not just a military victory. It was a statement. The United States was demonstrating, in the clearest possible terms, that control of the world's oceans rests in one pair of hands, and it is not Tehran's. No ship could hide. No port was safe for Iranian vessels. No amount of disguise or diplomatic cover could protect what remained of Iran's navy from being hunted down across thousands of square kilometers of open water. Now, here is where we need to have a deeper conversation, because what happened goes far beyond a military engagement. What we saw was the collision of two fundamentally different visions of how power works in the 21st century. Iran believed that controlling a geographic choke point, arming it with asymmetric weapons, and threatening global energy flows would give them leverage that their conventional military power could never provide. And for a while, it seemed like that bet might pay off. The world panicked. Oil prices surged. Shipping companies froze. The economic pressure was real, and it was felt in every gas station and every electricity bill across the Western world. But Iran made a critical miscalculation. They assumed that disruption alone would be enough to force the world to bend to their will. They assumed that the cost of confronting them would be higher than the cost of letting them have their way. And they were wrong. Because what Iran did not account for was the willingness of the United States to not just respond, but to completely dismantle their ability to threaten again. This was not a proportional response. It was an overwhelming one. And that distinction matters enormously. The American strategy operated on multiple levels simultaneously. In the air, bombers and reconnaissance aircraft worked around the clock to identify and destroy every fixed and mobile threat. At sea, carrier strike groups provided not just firepower, but a visible demonstration of commitment. On the surface, mine countermeasure vessels worked to clear the waters that Iran had poisoned. Underwater, submarines tracked fleeing vessels and ensured that escape was impossible. And in the background, satellites and cyber capabilities monitored communications, movements, and supply chains that fed the entire Iranian war machine. This was not a single operation. It was a coordinated campaign designed to eliminate Iran's ability to threaten the Strait of Hormuz at every level, from the missiles in the caves, to the fast boats on the surface, to the command centers directing everything from underground bunkers. And the message went even further than the military dimension. By escorting civilian tankers through the strait, the United States essentially assumed the role of global maritime guarantor. American warships personally shepherding commercial vessels through contested waters is not something that has happened on this scale in modern memory. It sends a powerful signal to allies and adversaries alike. The seas will remain open, trade will continue, and anyone who tries to hold the world economy hostage will face consequences they cannot withstand. But let us not pretend that this story is over. The physical navy of Iran may be largely destroyed, but the underlying tensions that created this crisis have not disappeared. Iran still possesses asymmetric capabilities. The missiles in the mountains have not all been found. The drone networks extend across multiple countries. And the political will in Tehran to resist Western influence has not weakened. If anything, the humiliation of watching their navy flee across the Indian Ocean and beg for port access in foreign countries will only deepen the regime's desire for revenge. The question now is, what comes next? Can the Strait of Hormuz ever return to being a safe and open passage the way it was before? Or has the trust been broken too deeply? Will Iran rebuild and try again? Or will the scale of this defeat force a fundamental rethink of their strategy? And perhaps, most importantly, will the military pressure from the United States be enough to prevent the next crisis, or is the region locked into a cycle of escalation that neither side can escape? These are not easy questions, and there are no easy answers. What is clear, however, is that the events of the past few weeks have reshaped the balance of power in the Middle East in ways we are only beginning to understand. Iran gambled everything on the belief that the world needed their oil more than they needed the world's approval. That gamble failed spectacularly, but the consequences of that failure will ripple across the region and the world for years to come. One thing is certain: the images of Iranian ships fleeing across the open ocean, hunted and cornered, will be remembered as a defining moment. A moment when a nation's ambitions crashed against the reality of overwhelming power. A moment that reminded the world that control of the seas is not just a military advantage. It is the foundation on which the entire global order rests. And right now, that foundation is held firmly by one nation, and it is not Iran. So what do you think? Was the American response justified and measured, or did it go too far? And do you believe the Strait of Hormuz can ever truly be safe again with Iran still in the region? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, because this conversation is far from over and your perspective matters to this community. If this video gave you a clearer picture of what is happening, do me a favor and share it with someone who needs to see it. That share button is right there. Tap it. It costs you nothing, and it helps this channel reach more people who care about understanding the world around them. Before you go, I want to tell you something that I think is important. There is a way to stay ahead of every major global development before it hits the headlines. Right now, thousands of people in this community are getting notified the moment a new video drops because they subscribed and turned on the bell icon. If you want to be one of them, all you have to do is click subscribe and tap that notification bell. It takes 2 seconds, and it means you will never miss the stories that matter most. We are just getting started, and what is coming next is bigger and more in depth than anything we have done before. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your time, and I will see you in the next one.